Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Crafting Christians, Developing Stewardship. I ran across the scripture in Matthew 25 about the parable of the bags of gold or the bags of talent. The owner went off on a trip and gave to some of his managers some money to use while he was gone. To one he gave 10 talents, to another he gave 5 talents, to another he gave 1 talent. That's King James Version. Anyway, the one who was given 10 talents invested it, used it, was a steward of it, and made more money for himself and for his master. The man who was given 5 talents used it, invested it, did something with it, took responsibility for it, made some money for himself and his master. But the person that was given 1 talent didn't do anything with it except bury it in the ground. He didn't want to take a chance, didn't want to lose any of it, and so he just buried it. In today's world, that might be a bit of wisdom versus taking a chance on losing it, just putting the money in a savings account kind of thing. But it all begs the question, what do we do with the talents that God gives us, the possessions that God gives us, the time and money that God gives us, our abilities and our life itself? What do we do with what God has given us? What do we have? When I begin a woodworking project, I look at what I have. I go to my scrap bin, look at the wood shelves on my shelves, and see what I have. For a long time, I had 2 tubes of wood about 11 inches long. And I carried those around through 2 or 3 moves. Don't remember what they came from. Don't know exactly what they were. But out of those tubes of wood, I ended up making 3 pencil holders. And also a train for my grandson, a train engine for my grandson. My woodworking projects always begin with what I have in my shop. That's where the ideas come from. It might be scrap wood, from which I make signs and do wood engraving, whatever I have. Sometimes when an idea hits me and I don't have the materials to make it with, I start looking for cheap, recyclable material to use. When I first began woodworking in the mid-90s, I was into recycled wood. So I had this idea that I would go to where buildings were being torn down and harvest wood from there and so on. I still do that. I look for thrown out wood that I might use for a project, a cheap and easy resource. Anyway, it's being a good steward of resources that God has given me. One of the things I recycled was a desk project, and I bought an old beat up desk for $10. The original idea was to use the drawers, but once I took the top off of it and the drawers out of it, it became a framework for stashing wood in and standing it up. The drawers I ended up making into 2 rolling end tables or footstools type things. So what has God given us? We all have a life. None of us asked for this life. It's been a gift given to us. We don't always look at it that way if our life has been hard. We didn't have a choice in having this life, but we've been given a life, so we're called to be stewards of the life that God has given us. We're called upon to be stewards of whatever talents God has given us, our abilities, our interests, whether it's woodworking, crafting, quilting, sewing, you name it. Whether it's witnessing on the street corner about Jesus Christ and what God has done in our lives, whether it's preaching the word, teaching a Sunday school class, children or adults, working with youth, singing in the choir. We all have talents and abilities that God has given us to use in our life. One of the things that is new to me this week as I studied this is the words that we have. We've all been given an opportunity to share, to speak, to form words. Sometimes it might be the written word. Sometimes it is the spoken word. How are we being a steward of the words, the thoughts and ideas that we have? Do we think about God often? Do we talk about God? Do we encourage one another? How we use our words is important as well. Stewardship isn't just about our possessions. It's not just about putting money in the offering plate, although that's a big aspect of it. Ministry takes resources and money of all kinds, people resources, volunteer resources, time resources, but also money resources, financial resources. What are we doing with the talents we've given it? Two of the men in the story that Jesus shared, the parable that Jesus shared, were commended for being good and faithful stewards. They used what God had given them and did something with it. So God is looking at us to see if we are good and faithful stewards of what God has given us. So spend a few moments thinking about your life, your time, your talents, your possessions, your abilities, your interests, and your words, and how are you using them to glorify God, to point people to God, to encourage one another in a godly walk in life. God bless and have a great week.